Even Josephus, the historian who lived during the time of Christ, incorporated in his history some information about Adam that even the writer of Genesis did not include. The point is this: taking Adam off the list of historical biblical personalities solves nothing at all. One cannot climb into an ivory tower, take a theological position, and escape all the consequences. The idea of a fictitious Adam is fraught with unsavory theological implications.
After Adam leaves the garden, the writer of Genesis focuses in on his first son, who carries out an egregious act of violence and kills his younger brother, bringing about his banishment from the confines of Eridu, where he must make his way removed from family and friends. Cain's concern for his safety causes God to give him some kind of mark, Genesis 4:15, to afford him safe passage and acceptance wherever it is he goes to dwell.
We can assume Cain did not just wander off and disappear, or else the Genesis writer would have no idea what he named the city, or who his offspring were that are described in Genesis 4:16 through 25, or what they did. Cain's whereabouts and the accomplishments and attitudes of his descendants were well enough known that they could be recorded.
There did exist at one time some historical information upon which Josephus could draw in compiling his history of the Jews. He records that Cain became wickeder and it obliged him to be injurious to his neighbors, quote unquote.
According to Josephus, he augmented his household substance with much wealth. By rapine and violence, he incited his acquaintance to luxury and robbery, and became their leader in wicked courses.
He introduced weights and measures, according to Josephus, and whereas they lived innocently and generously while they knew nothing of such arts, he changed the world into cunning craftiness. He first of all set boundaries about land. He built a city and fortified it with walls, and compelled his family to crowd into it and called it Enoch, after the name of his son, Enoch.
We already knew Genesis 4:16 through 18 that Cain's son was Enoch, and the city was named for him. But here the historian provides us with some valuable information that helps us to know where it was that Cain now called home, and some of the circumstances.
The people living in the city where Cain settled were less culturally advanced. He taught them things that quite likely he learned at Eridu. Also, they needed a fortified city with walls to help them defend themselves from attackers.
The Sumerian king list discussed in previous episodes helps us here. After two Akkadian kings reigned at Eridu, Alulim and Alagar, Eridu is smitten with weapons. Kingship to Badabira is carried.
When a city is destroyed and its king removed and a new king reigns in the victorious city, that is a good reason to build a fortified city. And apparently Cain did exactly that. Those who had been living in Eridu at that time would have been the indigenous population, Ubadans quite likely, and the descendants of Seth. Now, as the dreary results of war, they needed to leave, and the pottery remains found at Eridu suggest they did. But where would Seth's family go for a safe haven?
Genesis gives us reason to believe Seth's family lived in close proximity to Cain's family, perhaps for protection, in or near to a fortified city.
This slide compares the names of the sons of Cain alongside the sons of Seth. And what we are looking for are signs that these two families lived in close proximity, evidenced by their naming their children similar names, something that would be unlikely if there was great distance and no communication between the two families. At the outset, the son of Cain has a counterpart in the family of Seth. The difference between Irad and Jerad could be simply a translational difference, converting Hebrew into English. Sumerologist and Hebrew scholar William Hallow considers that the Hebrew name Irad is linked with the Akkadian city Eridu, which does make logical sense. Methusael is not far off Methuselah, and Lamech on the Cain side rings with Lamech on the Seth side.
This similarity in names gives us ample reason to believe two families remain in close proximity.
So a good reason to believe these two families remained in close contact comes from comparing the two genealogies in Genesis. If Cain had pulled a disappearing act, there is no way subsequent Semite generations who follow Noah would have had any knowledge as to who Cain's descendants were, or anything about them. Also, the narrative of Cain's generations give us valuable historical perspective.
In Genesis 4:19 through 20, we read, "And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The names of the one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. And Adah bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle."
The text is not telling us that everyone living in a tent or raising livestock descended directly from Jabal, just that there were those who did in his family or his extended family, such as a tribe. And we know that raising domesticated cattle was an activity relegated to a time period after 12,000 years ago.
This is Genesis 4:21. "And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ."
This is an example of what a harp looked like in the days of ancient Sumer. We can suppose that harps in the days of Jubal may have been more rustic. Again, we have no cause to believe that all those who played musical instrument were Jubal's offspring. Jubal likely was at the head of a tribe that had musicians in it, and although bone flutes may have been found dated to earlier than 30,000 years associated with Cro-Magnon man, certainly no stringed musical instruments date to such an early period.
Here is Genesis 4:22. "And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah."
Implements and crude weapons of bronze have been recovered dating to as early as 3000 BC. Firing temperatures hot enough to smelt iron was not obtained until about 1000 BC. However, bog iron was available and could be beaten into useful tools.
The last descendant of Cain was named in Genesis, and maybe the last of Cain's line, whoever lived, spoke to his wives in Genesis 4:23 through 24. "Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold."
Rampant sin without remorse is on display here. Tubal-Cain, according to Josephus, devised armor for the girding of the body. He goes on to say, "Even while Adam was alive, the posterity of Cain became exceeding wicked, one after another by force of example, turning out worse."
Returning to the Sumerian king list, once more it proves useful identifying Cain's city named Enoch for his son.